Can someone explain to me why the US is helping Ukraine so much? It's less about Ukraine, more about preventing Russia from expanding and making a new USSR. If they were able to take Ukraine, why exactly would they stop? Just a few years ago they just wanted Crimea, took it without much pushback by the rest of the world. And now look, they want the whole country now. It will never stop. Russia has been creeping out of his borders and played a two-faced political game in which Putin says he will do something and then breaks all agreements. Russia went basically unchecked in its last, comparatively minor land grabs. The US and allies are drawing a line in the sand as to avoid a full-on world war if Russia keeps on pushing into Europe. But perhaps more importantly, the US is complying with the Budapest Memorandum, of which Russia is also a signatory party. On December 5, 1994, the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, Britain, and the United States signed a memorandum to provide Ukraine with security assurances in connection with its accession to the NPT as a non-nuclear weapon state. Basically, Ukraine agreed to denuclearize, and in turn the signants provided security assurances as to its independence. Finally, the US needs a stable Europe as a partner. Letting Russia push its sphere of influence into the EU would heavily destabilize the continent, affecting some of the US' main geopolitical partners. Helping Ukraine is not only moral and ethical, it's also quite practical. It's done and will continue to do immense damage to Russia's capability to threaten the NATO countries. It's united NATO after a time when the alliance was at its weakest point. We've even convinced Finland and Sweden to join NATO, which despite Turkey's negotiating tactics will happen eventually. It assures other allies around the world that they can count on promises from the US, which prevents conflicts from breaking out elsewhere in the world, and also encourages countries to engage in trade with the US, as President Theodore Roosevelt once advised. Speak softly and carry a big stick. Much of US power is based on our big stick. But if we refuse to use it when it's clearly justified, if we retreat into isolationism, our interests will suffer all over the world. The US has also gained military and intelligence benefits from helping Ukraine. We've learned a great deal about Russia's military capabilities. Ukraine has done great damage to those capabilities, not just by exposing its weaknesses, but also by killing many of Russia's most experienced officers and soldiers. If Russia is busy in Ukraine, it's less capable of causing trouble for the US elsewhere in the world, as it has repeatedly tried to do. The amount of money the US has spent on the war in Ukraine is very small compared to its overall defense budget, and the value is greater than any other expenditure. But all of that will collapse if we weary of doing so and let Russia win. That will just prove that the way to defeat the US and NATO is to be stubborn and brutal and outlast them. That's what Putin is counting on. It's very important to prove that's not true. So yes, to some extent there's a sunk cost involved. But this is not like Iraq or Afghanistan where there's no long-term solution. We have a clearly defined goal and most of the world is on our side. We must see it through, while of course working towards a diplomatic solution as well. This is like our Cold War strategy, which worked because we sustained it with a bipartisan effort for 45 years. We can afford to sustain this effort and we can't afford the alternative. We learned the lesson during World War II that it's much better to stop a despot hell-bent on world domination early than it is to appease them. Let them become emboldened and acquire more resources. Putin wouldn't stop at Ukraine, and if he isn't stopped there, the rest of the world will almost certainly wind up in a hot war with nuclear exchanges. Two major reasons come to mind. 1. Russia is a major political rival and this war has weakened them with very little investment on our part. 2. Ukraine is a major exporter of food, particularly wheat, which is definitely going to become a necessity in future. And they will remember who helped them. They did not join NATO, so we are not helping them directly in the way we would if a NATO member was attacked, where we'd be contractually obligated to help. We are helping them because of several reasons. It is in the public interest to help provide stability to a major economy. It is in the public interest to help provide safety to Europe as a whole. It is in the US interest to prevent Russia from gaining more military and strategic advantage in Europe. The US believes that what Russia is doing is objectively wrong. The US believes that if Russia gets away with invading Ukraine, it's just going to keep reinforcing the belief that Putin can do whatever the hell he wants with no consequence. Russia is trying to take back all the countries that left the USSR. They are picking on the weak ones first. If they succeed in Ukraine, then they move to Poland, which is in NATO. Our treaties commit us to sending US troops if they invade a NATO country. So if we help Ukraine stop them now, we don't have to go to war. If we don't help Ukraine, then we end up in a war with Russia. I speak as someone who is currently in the military and has deployed to the Middle East 2 times. I see this as a huge testing for our military capability without using American lives. I know this is costly from a money spectrum and I have mixed views of what is going on, but I do like this from the military standpoint. For the last 2 decades, almost our entire military has been shaped around chasing goat herders and low-level terrorists in the mountains, where we just learned surveillance and speed to strike 4 or 5 guys if we were lucky. While that was going on, the military has constantly been keeping an eye on potential near-peer threats like Russia or China, who has similar military capabilities, and figuring out how to go straight into a war with. So the US had to make sure we had technology available to match and deploy against them. Now we have a scenario where an ally who was invaded by one of our near-peer threats needs military equipment and assistance, so the US sees an opportunity to ship them equipment to see how they match up against a trained military without having to back them with American lives, which is way better in the American public's eyes compared to a full-out war with a country that is constantly threatening to nuke everything in EU. You don't want to start setting the precedent that powerful dictatorship can conquer neighboring countries by force. If Russia can do it to Ukraine, then they'll do it to Georgia and Moldova. China will do it to Taiwan. Maybe North Korea decides to invade the South. And remember what happened when we let Hitler have Czechoslovakia unopposed. He didn't stop with Czechoslovakia. Plus, quite aside from geopolitical concerns, we have a moral duty to help a country where tens of thousands of civilians have been slaughtered and their homes blown up. Again, countries can't be allowed to do war crimes unopposed. Why is Ukraine so important that the whole world is helping them try to stop Russia from absorbing them? There's a lot of reasons. But mostly we know from that ignoring an authoritarian regime invading a neighbor in Eastern Europe can be a very, very bad idea. There's this thing in political science called democratic peace. It notes that, for whatever reason, democracies are less likely to do battle with each other. The reasons why for this are heavily debated, but the upshot is that America, a democracy, and NATO, a coalition of democracies, will bend over backwards to help Ukraine, a democracy, from being invaded by Russia, an autocracy. Ukraine is providing the soldiers. The U.S. are getting an absolute bargain in terms of reducing Russia's fighting capability per dollar spent. especially considering most of the stuff being sent is old stock that's expensive to maintain and would otherwise rot, expire. All the small countries without the nukes are interested in preserving internationally recognized borders. Otherwise everyone with nukes can start taking territories. Why USA care about interests of some irrelevant countries? It is because unstable world is a threat to USA. Because for USA, it is also very dangerous for various countries to start getting their own nukes to protect themselves from being invaded. This unstable world is dangerous for everyone, but only few limited countries are in position to do anything meaningful about it. Preserving established world's order is in USA's best interests, but it is also in best interest of Moldova, Norway, Japan, Italy and so on. The Western world let Germany have Czechoslovakia. The Western world allowed Russia to take Crimea. The Western world learned from appeasement and know when to put a foot down. There's a children's book called, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, that sums it up quite well. As does the phrase, give an inch and they'll take a mile. You realize that the last time the world was satisfied with letting a dictator just grab what he wanted. It eventually led to a world war? Funny thing about dictators is that they rarely say, I think that's enough conquest for now. I'm satisfied. Is there anything good on TV tonight? Quote, Putin is a Nazi. He is our version of Hitler. Everyone you meet always talks about how they would go back in time and kill Hitler. Today we have our Hitler. It's Putin. The only people who should be against stopping Putin are Nazis and Republicans who are getting paid by Russia to spread their pro-Russia talking points. Everyone should be against a dictator murdering children for fun and sport. Even if you don't consider Russia our enemy, they consider us their enemy. And when someone like that hands you a once-in-a-lifetime chance to kneecap them for a generation, without risking a single one of your own soldiers, you don't pass up that chance. I would say that the primary reason for us assisting them is the amount of damage we are causing to arguably one of our biggest rivals, enemies. We are able to do this without being in open conflict, while sending the stuff we were going to dispose of eventually anyways, while also not losing any US life in the conflict. It also buys us political favor with every nation also assisting them in the conflict. It's effectively a proxy war with the West over Russian expansion.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.